Well, welcome everybody once again officially to Core Volunteer Training, and a special welcome to those of you who are emerging group leaders here this evening. Core Volunteer Training is a weekly webinar program of the Citizens Climate Lobby that provides CCL supporters, especially newer supporters and emerging group leaders, easy access to training about topics relating to climate change and effective climate advocacy. Tonight's training is Lobbying 201, Planning and Practicing Your Lobby Meetings. I'm your host, Tamara Staton, here in Portland, Oregon. So let me introduce the lovely Amy Bennett, Director of Congressional Liaisons and Lobby Days. She provides training and support to volunteer liaisons as they build relationships with congressional offices and help representatives move up the ladder of support for effective legislative action. She's responsible for this huge job of organizing CCL's lobby days in Washington, D.C., including mentoring liaisons on how to schedule and organize congressional meetings and to maintain productive dialogues throughout the year. We have three primary goals for you this evening. The first one is to help you understand the planning process behind our meeting preparations with members of Congress and their staff. Our second goal for you is to, or I should say for us, is to demonstrate what a respect-based relational meeting looks like and sounds like, as well as understand why we take this approach. And it's one of my favorite parts of the meeting, I have to say. And our third goal is to help you prepare for your own meeting and feel confident in knowing where to go for support, tools, and resources. So let me pass it over to Amy, and then I get to play in a little bit here.
Thank you, Tamara. And I have someone in the waiting room, but evidently as a co-host, oh, there we go. I can admit her. There we go. Got it. Well, thank you so much. And first, we're going to start off with a quick review. And to start, it is all about relationships. That's how our meetings bring successful results over time. Respect and appreciation, appealing to the best in others, and being for something is how we move a member up the ladder of support towards becoming a climate champion. And then in the meeting, we have specific roles. I mean, obviously it's a fluid situation, but when we're planning our meeting, we try to pinpoint who's going to do what. And to start off with, it's always good to designate someone as the leader. And the leader is the lobby team member who empowers everyone to share and participate, especially the constituents. That's who the member is going to be listening to the most, so that we can build our capacity for this work. If the leader is not the liaison, the leader is responsible for briefing the liaison after. And the leader works collaboratively to figure out who's going to do what and take on what roles in the meeting. So an analogy we find useful is that of the conductor of an orchestra. So the leader empowers participation, manages the meeting, but doesn't dominate, handles the transitions between different parts of the meeting to be sure we're moving on, helps to plan the open-ended questions with your team. Look for those shared values like creation, care for creation, jobs for constituents, and so on. It's also good for the leader to ask clarifying questions when things aren't very clear or things are moving too fast, like asking, "Oh, I'm hearing you say this. Is that right?" So the leader is also helping the conversation stay on track and redirect it as needed. And the leader will help decide on an appropriate ask or a supporting ask for the meeting. Usually these meetings, there's a practice meeting ahead of time where you plan and rehearse. Right. So we're going to look more specifically at the roles.
Amy, do we want to see what this group has in mind? And we want to give you an opportunity for engagement here. If you would like to play along in the chat, what roles do you think would be good to have in a lobby meeting? Imagine that there are maybe 5, 6 of you in a lobby meeting, and you're all sitting around, perhaps on the couch, perhaps on Zoom, and the staff member, perhaps the member of Congress is there with you. what roles do you envision would be helpful to have in a lobby meeting? I know that at least a few of you in this Zoom space have been in lobby meetings, so feel free to drop some ideas in the chat. But even if you're brand new, there are no wrong answers here, because this is a brainstorm for you to just start wrapping your mind around what kinds of roles might be helpful. So for example, we talked about the leader as one role, and what kinds of roles would be supportive of the leader in the meeting, because obviously the leader is not going to be the only one doing everything in the meeting. I'm going to share this next slide, and Amy is going to talk you through some, all right, there's some ideas popping up. Thanking the member of Congress for their work on climate. Yes, somebody to share the gratitude, the appreciator. Yeah. Timekeeper. Very important. Note taker, asker, leader, thanker, follow up, background. Why you guys are being, that's why there was so much silence in the chat, because you guys were being very, very thorough. Policy expert, opening and closing speaker, background context speaker, the speaker who makes the ask. Amy, they've made your job on this next slide very easy.
Yay, yay.
Yeah, nice work.
So, some of you said it in different words, but someone to appreciate is the appreciator. Absolutely. We always start off with an appreciation. And time monitor, that's always helpful when things get rolling, to remind the group that the staffer or the member only gave us 15 minutes and we're at 10 minutes, or they gave us 30 minutes and we're at 25. The asker presenting the ask, the quote ask or supporting ask that's the most appropriate for this member. Deliverer, that's like a tongue twister. That's the person who brings correspondence or grass tops endorsements. And in the days of virtual meetings, we often send that ahead. So that is often the liaison who might send that information ahead. We used to call them leave behinds, but they're really more effective when you send them ahead. And follow up, very important, responsible for sending any materials that are asked for, a thank you card, that type of thing. Sometimes that's on a kudo board. And the follow-up person coordinates with the liaison after the meeting to be sure that all of that follow-up happens. And with virtual meetings, it is really important to have a tech support person on the Zoom line if you're doing the call via Zoom, so that they're aware and might mute a person who accidentally unmutes themselves, that kind of thing. We always find that's really helpful. Great way of involving youth as well. So let's talk about planning the meeting. Prior to the meeting, it's very important, and this is often something that can be delegated, to research your member. It's great to script out what you expect their positions are going to be based on the research that you do. We have a meeting plan template that is really easy if you've never done this before. It's kind of a fill in the blanks kind of thing. Who's assigned to this? What's the ask going to be? What are the open-ended questions? It's a really helpful guide. Great to use that in your planning meeting or your rehearsal. And it's a good idea also to remind your team about letting the member or staffer talk the most. I'm actually having a liaison call, and I'm going to remind them about how important it is. We try to actually track, the minute taker or note taker tracks what percentage of time the CCLers were talking versus the member of Congress or the Congress member staffer. And our aim is to get that at about 50-50. So it's really important to remind your team that allowing silence is a good idea. We sometimes feel pretty tense and we want to get everything in, but it's really important to let the member or the staffer answer questions that we ask them as fully as possible. I actually offer to give permission to my fellow attendees to redirect me if I start getting too excited and taking up too much airspace, and that in a way offers everybody permission to help redirect if, for instance, we get too excited and talk too much, that someone might speak up and say, "Oh, Sarah Staffer," or "Oh, Congressman, can we clarify what you said a minute ago? I just want to fully understand that." And I try to catch myself, so watch it in the role play that we do. Now, here is an example of some research and planning that we did looking at the members of Congress's press page. That's where they like to show off the accomplishments that they're proud of. You also can sign up for their newsletter, and then you'll find out maybe once a week what they're really excited about. This example shows that the member that we're going to be talking about here joined with another member on the other side of the aisle to introduce the Clean Energy Future through Innovation Act of 2020. It's a bipartisan proposal to accelerate the development and commercialization of clean energy technology to establish clear and durable standards for their use in the electric power sectors. It's a very interesting bill. Now, Congressman McKinley, the one who's the member we're going to pretend we're meeting with today, said America needs energy policy that can endure rather than one that changes after each election and judicial decision. No policy can succeed without certainty, and certainty requires bipartisan consensus. Furthermore, by positioning America as a leader in innovation, it'll allow us to export our technology to the rest of the world and provide a global solution to this problem. So we can really tell a lot about this guy from his press release. Now, the next slide that we're going to show you, McKinley said in March during a webinar at the Bipartisan Policy Center. So it was really great to see him on video and see how passionate he is about this. Again, it can be really careful to script out how you think the conversation will go or how the member might answer questions based on the past conversations or this research that we're going to show you. And it can be helpful to start with some notes as we do on the next screen. It's also a great practice to restate what you heard the member say, as I demonstrated just a minute ago. Before we respond too quickly, point out what we can agree with. All right, so we have got a video we're going to show you.
Okay, so thanks, Amy, for all of that. Before we listen to Congressman McKinley's interview with the Bipartisan Policy Center, I thought it might be helpful to mention that there may be some of you on this call that tend towards the progressive end of the spectrum, and it can be helpful to think of this video as research. It can also be helpful to notice what comes up for you in regards to thoughts and feelings that you might have, and having this awareness around your reactions when somebody says something that might, that is so different from what you believe or what you think or what you know to be true. Having that awareness about yourself can really help us in our conversations with those with different perspectives.
Question, thanks. From Jonathan Berman, how does a carbon tax compare to what you're thinking about doing here?
Thus far, we have avoided that because we don't see there's an appetite for a carbon tax. We know people have talked about carbon tax or carbon pricing. We remember we went through years ago before I came here was a cap and trade issue. All those issues are somewhat polarizing. And ultimately, anytime you put a carbon tax or something like that on there, you're increasing the cost to the consumer. And the utility companies, it's just a pass through, the consumer is going to pay for it. I strongly believe that we won't need to do that. If we can do the innovation, finding ways to capture the carbon, we won't need to go that. We won't need to have that. The technology is still emerging, but it's already showing up. We have Net Power down in Texas has actually demonstrated using the alum cycle that they can go to zero emissions. Let's just find out how mechanically, how can we adopt that across the country? People flipping from the Rankine over to the alum cycle, is that a way to save it? Let's find out. So this is part of this innovation for 10 years. For 10 years, no new regulations, but intense investment in innovation. And once we come out of that, then we're going to be able to transform that, transport that through trade or whatever to other nations. Because, as I said in my opening remarks, it's American can decarbonize. We can. But what about the rest of the world? When we're burning about 750 million tons, and China is burning 5 billion tons, in India 1.1 billion tons. Those are the nations we need to focus on. So we're going to show them through our innovation how they might be able to achieve it, and ultimately we'll have a cleaner environment. So thank you very much for the chance to chat with your group, and I hope we can follow up with us. This thing's I think it's one of the most important pieces of legislation that I've dealt with in the last 11 years.
So knowing McKinley's perspective, which he really pointed out pretty clearly here, it can be so much easier to plan a successful meeting. So first of all, every meeting and interaction should make him want to see us again. From the interview, we can see where we can build some bridges, where we can say, I agree with you, Congressman. Consumer prices, innovation, competition with other countries and their other countries getting emissions under control. Those are all areas we can agree on. We also want to avoid giving too much information and instead focus on opportunities to build trust. This is an early meeting. We're pretending this is an early meeting with him. And so it's easy to slip up and ask yes, no questions. We do want to script out those questions ahead of time, which help him to talk. A yes, no question kind of ends the conversation. Yes, no. But an open-ended question gives the member prompting to give us more information.
Hey, Amy, do we want to take just a minute to practice that? It can be pretty natural for a lot of us to just charge into a yes or no question. So I invite you, share any yes or no question. Do you see anything about the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act that you can get behind? Yes, that's a great yes or no question. Okay, so how about the little more challenging? Is China the largest emitter of carbon? That's a great yes or no question either. You all are so insightful here on this call. You're thinking of much more complicated questions than my dog questions. Okay, how about an open-ended question, which generally start with who, what, where, why, when, how, right? So you could even take your other question that was a yes or no question and turn it into an open-ended question.
And one of the things that I think is important, because you never know where the conversation might end up, or often we're given more time than we initially thought. It's really a good idea to have a big chunk of extra open-ended questions as time allows, or as the conversation starts to go in a specific direction. I can't tell you how hard it is to come up with good questions on the fly when you're in the room and it's
Right.
you're a little nervous.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is there's a difference between a question that gets at a perspective that somebody has as opposed to information that they have, right? And when we ask information seeking questions, sometimes people can feel like, oh, they're testing me. They're actually seeing if I know the information, as opposed to coming from a place of like curiosity, like tell us your perspective on, or because are you aware of, or do you know kind of questions, I think can often, even if we don't mean it that way, can just put people on the defensive. So can you tell me a little bit more about the alum cycle? Great, way to connect it to the video, Cheryl. All right, Amy, I'll let you.
I have one more comment on that. Is especially when you meet with staff or when you meet with the members, some of them, because they're not on a committee that deals with climate change and their focus is somewhere else. It is important, as someone put in the chat earlier, to find out if they understand what we're talking about when we're talking about either carbon fee and dividend, or a rising fee on carbon with the returns going to American households. You want to make sure you're talking about the same thing. So it is important, but you also, like, you don't want to insult them and say, what do you know about a carbon tax? Obviously, you want to ask them, we want to make sure this is why we often say we're here to talk about a graduated fee on carbon with returns going back to the American households. Can't tell you how many meetings you can be in, and the staff might be thinking you're talking about cap and trade or some other policy. And so it's really good to sensitively share or ask about their feelings on a carbon tax with the money going back, carbon fee.
Okay. I also noticed that nobody in the chat started a question with why, and I want to mention that that's a great idea to avoid why questions, because why can often put people on the defensive as well. So even like what about, or share more about, you can get at the why without actually saying, well, why do you feel that way? Right? Because people are like, oh, right? So before we continue, let's talk about the 5 steps to balanced listening. And I know there's a lot on this slide, but I'm going to start at the top and then move my way to the bottom. And so the first point is that we want to reflect back the question or concern that we hear, and then connect on the shared values to the best of our ability. For example, I'm glad you're thinking carefully about other countries' emissions. It sounds like it matters to you to drive down global emissions. The second point would be to listen to their response and then come back with anything that you agree with them about. For example, I agree with you. We do need to spur innovation. America is a leader in tech and space and medicine. Innovation is needed so that other countries can be effective at reducing emissions. People feel validated when we agree with them, right? And it opens their brain to get into more discussion. The third point is to ask permission to share your point of view. This is shockingly effective. And even if somebody doesn't want to hear it, if you ask permission, they often say yes. For example, may I tell you what I understand about an approach like the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act that actually makes me excited about how it will accelerate innovation? It provides an opening. The fourth point is if they agree and are open to more, then you can go down to a few more specifics. And after sharing your 1 or 2 points, then you ask for their thoughts. And you want to tailor what you do next to their response. So if they resist, then you build rapport. If they are open or supportive, then you can talk about ideas for moving forward. And in this case, you can share your perspective, maybe using some of the points about the policy's border carbon adjustment to address the congressman's concerns about other international actors stepping up to reduce emissions. And the last point is to make a few points and then follow up with 1 or 2 open-ended questions to find out how well they are receiving the information. For example, what are your thoughts about a border adjustment satisfying Republican concerns? Share a point or 2 and follow it up with an open-ended question. Because, all right, Amy, I'm going to pass it back to you for this basic meeting outline before we get into the drama of it.
Great, great. So final slide here before we begin our mock meeting. I want to suggest that the outline is pretty simple, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we're going to pause in between each of those sections to review and take your questions. So to start a lobby meeting, what we're going to do now is demonstrate a meeting. I'll narrate the demo. We'll stop at certain points to debrief just what happened. I'll play the meeting leader, who also happens to be a constituent of Congressman McKinley's, and Tamara's going to play the role of Congressman McKinley. Sometimes she wears a mustache for this. We'll go through the beginning, the middle, and the end of the meeting. And our congressman is from West Virginia's 1st Congressional District. Our agenda is going to be broad because we're play acting here a first meeting. And the first meeting is going to be the start of what we want to have be a long-term relationship rather than a one-time event. And we want to advise him on the policy and tell them what we're doing to create the political will in the district that he will need. Prepare to do a lot of listening so we'll know how to, and we want to be prepared to do a lot of listening so we know how to move forward in the future. All right, so you have your mustache on there, Congressman?
Of course. I haven't shaved in a long time, Amy.
Oh, there you are. I didn't see you in my screen. Lovely, Congressman. Hello, my name is Amy. I'm with Citizens Climate Lobby, a volunteer organization. And we appreciate all that you've done for your constituents during the pandemic. And thank you for carving out time for us, Congressman.
Well, it's so great to see you engaged in the political process. I'm so glad to meet with you today.
Thank you, Congressman. We know it's a busy day for you. So how much time do you have for the meeting today?
Oh, it looks like I have a committee meeting in 20 minutes, so about 15.
Well, my name's Amy Bennett. I'm a constituent of yours living in Wheeling, West Virginia, and I'm a school teacher. And I'm here today because I'm worried about the kind of world the kids that I teach will grow up with. And given these times, I want to do my part to make it as safe as possible for them.
Well, Amy, you do know that I'm sure that I served for 14 years in the West Virginia legislature fighting for school children and seniors. I believe the government should exercise its powers to look after our most vulnerable citizens. I admire you for devoting your life to educating kids. I know our federal government continues to screw this up by trying to impose its will on our local school districts.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Congressman. We'd like to start by telling you how much we admire your bipartisan work to introduce legislation that protects retired miners' pensions. My family has been a part of that proud tradition, and it means a lot to us.
It is so important to me that all West Virginians know that if they work hard, then they'll be able to retire comfortably.
That's fantastic. Since we have a few minutes, Congressman, let me briefly tell you why we're here, and then we'd like to hear your thoughts on the carbon pricing policy that we're supporting. Our purpose is to create the will for a livable world. We're working to create the political space we know that you'll need to support policies that help manage climate risks. Your constituents have been expressing support for climate action, and our volunteers have collected endorsements for our community leaders in Wheeling. Our ask is for you to support carbon pricing that puts a steadily rising fee on fossil fuel emissions and returns all the revenues back to American households. It's good for people, the economy, and effective at managing the risks we face with our changing climate. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this approach to climate risk. We'd also love to hear your thoughts on responsible energy policy in general. Where would you like to begin? So, what did you notice? Maybe type your observations in the chat right now. For example, I noticed that the description of carbon fee and dividend is very quick, and it gets us all on the same page. What did you notice or stood out to you? Yes, I totally asked how much time. I'm playing basically all the meeting team roles, so that would be the timekeeper who might do that. Or if you only have one, a timekeeper and a note taker, they might do this, they might ask that. It's really important to get that ahead of time so that we're aware. What else did you happen to notice about some of what happened there? Yes, common ground topic, absolutely. It's so important to set that tone right from the beginning on common ground or an appreciation. It is so important not to forget to say that up front, and then be able to say, then have your conversation and then remind them at the end. It's very important. I'll tell you, there are meetings where you just somehow that gets lost. And that's the last thing you want to do, is have the end of the meeting and them not know what you're trying to ask them to do. And they will be frustrated with that. But they might then just go off to their next meeting. So say it up front, have a conversation, sandwich it, say it again. And Debbie says, once I gave a group of students a crash course in lobbying, and the part of the training included doing some homework on the congressperson's work on climate. Absolutely. And the aide even pointed that out. They really care. That helps you get the next meeting when you show them that you are prepared. It's absolutely, because they deal with a very wide range of the public going in to talk to them about issues. And the more you are into give and take and being prepared, the more they will want you back. All right, very good. Let us continue on.
So I'm hearing more about the need to address climate change. I'm balancing those concerns with others in my district on fixed incomes. They're concerned with rising energy prices. Here in West Virginia, we still have a strong coal sector. As for policy, you can put me in the all of the above energy category. America cannot do this alone. We have to get the rest of the world involved. My constituents want to stop the federal government's overreach. We do not like the hammer of regulation around here.
So what I'm hearing you say is that both the economy and the environment are important to you, not one or the other. Is that a fair assessment?
Sure. I mean, a lot of negative things are said about me, Amy, because I'm putting our country first, but a full environmental agenda is simply not good for business.
Well, we can certainly appreciate being unfairly labeled. I mean, we're often portrayed as being anti-business, but nothing could be further from the truth. And like you, we want the economy and the environment to flourish. So have you been briefed on a carbon price with cash back, or how might it compare to your similar bill, the Clean Energy Future Through Innovation Act?
I know my aide has reviewed it in detail, Amy, but why don't you tell me about it?
Well, it sounds like that we agree that we need to provide incentives for our economy to transition to the biggest market opportunity of the 21st century, clean energy. If the U.S. could expand its share of the market in producing clean energy products and the technology to capture carbon, then we're talking about trillions of dollars. The carbon fee and dividend puts a steadily increasing fee on carbon with dividends returned to the American households. How does that sound to you?
I mean, let me be clear, Amy. I want to support policies that will not kill jobs here in West Virginia. If we impose additional costs to Americans, it's our own constituents that will suffer. If America lowers its emissions, it would not solve the problem. You'd have to be delusional to think that it would stop floods or droughts.
But actually, the United States is in a position to lead the world. Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting. Let me go back here and make sure that I understand your question. Are you concerned about the economic effects locally of what might happen if the United States takes action without the other large emitters following?
Well, yeah, I am. We don't live in a vacuum. China and India's emissions went up from 2000 to 2016 by 290% and 235%, and the US's went down by 16%. So unless India reduces emissions, expect major climate change regardless of US action.
I'm glad you're thinking carefully about what other countries' emissions or what's happening with other countries' emissions and the need to have them help drive down global emissions. I struggled with this as well. May I tell you what I found out about using a carbon border adjustment that put me at ease?
Sure. Put me at ease too, please.
Well, Congressman, knowing your economic background, I think you'll appreciate what we've learned. We support a carbon price with a carbon border adjustment that our international trade legal experts assure us complies with WTO commitments. It would impose a tariff on other countries that don't have a similar carbon fee in their country to ensure protection for domestic manufacturing. What are your thoughts about a border carbon adjustment satisfying your concerns?
Why don't you tell me how does that work?
Well, let's pause here and let's recap that middle part. In regards to my eagerness to respond, did you see that I kind of caught myself jumping in without really listening to Representative McKinley's question? One of the goals we have tonight is help you all feel really comfortable with pulling back. How would you handle it if somebody else jumps in too fast? Maybe put something in the chat if you have a good idea on that. It's important to practice finding a tactful way to step back if another member jumps in without asking permission to proceed. For instance, Tamara might say, or Tamara, I think it's important that Congressman McKinley clarifies his thoughts before we go further. Is that okay with you? So you could even role play that in a rehearsal, or like I said, when I do a rehearsal, I try to tell everyone, please pull me back if I get too excited. That's just the way I am. That can sometimes kind of alert people to, oh, maybe I should be careful too.
And how many of you on the call, you could show of hands if you're on video, or you could pop a note in the chat, can relate to the tendency, like Amy did, to jump in to correct someone when we think they are either not hearing us or they said something incorrect, or we really need to make sure that they get it right? A lot of us do as humans. It's so hard for us to hear something that just doesn't, I mean, there's a part of our brain that when it actually like lights up this different part of our brain, I'm sure Pat, you might know about that. Yeah, Amy, go ahead and keep going if you'd like.
Oh, okay. So yeah, tell us what you notice in your own life about another person when they're handling a difficult situation, when they ask permission to share rather than just sharing. There's a huge difference there. There's something that happens. So have you all noticed that? Tell us something in the chat if you have had, times when someone asks you permission rather than just jumping in.
Or you can even just unmute and just share aloud. Like, what do you notice about the relationship? What do you notice about the other person? What happens between you? What do you notice about their face, about their body language? You're talking about when we ask for permission, right, Amy?
Right. May I continue? Did we understand you correctly? Can I tell you about, the carbon border adjustment? May I tell you about the carbon border adjustment? It gets the person in a better place to me and more open to hear you.
It reminds me that we do have a training called motivational interviewing, and this whole concept. I don't know if you're nodding, maybe you know of it or maybe you've done it, but it's kind of a challenging skill to be able to embody. But to just be able to make space for people, especially when we only have 15 minutes or we only have 25 minutes, right? It's like this time limited thing, and we need to like solve climate change in 25 minutes, and there's just so much to do, and we need to change their mind, right? It's really a matter of embodying a different way of being when we're in these lobby meetings. It's like, Alex, you were saying, like, how can we walk into the meeting and embody this way of being that is more like, let's sit back on the couch and discuss this something. Like, I remember my first time when it hit me that we were sitting across this huge table in a lobby meeting with the staffers from this Oregon Senate office, and it was like this aha moment that, number one, the staffers were way younger than I was, and number two, it's like, oh, we're just here to talk about things that we both care about in different ways, right? Like, what's the language that we're going to use? And as soon as that hit me, like, it just changed my perspective on lobbying, and the fact that we get half an hour or 45 minutes or 15 minutes to be able to talk about these things, and like, it's making time to talk about this thing on their busy schedule. All right, Amy, should we do the last part of the meeting?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Go ahead.
Let's resume that scenario. Congressman, I see that we're nearing the end of our time with you. I think it'll be important in working together to understand what next steps you would like our local group to take so that you'd be willing to support a bill that puts a fee on carbon and returns the net proceeds to American households.
Well, I think it's a novel approach that you have, but I do have some reservations, Amy, especially when compared to a clean energy standard. I mean, I'm intrigued by the dividend element and how this would affect the pocketbooks of my constituents, honestly.
I understand. I'll send you our household impact study for West Virginia's first district, so you can see how returning the revenue back to individual families in your district, how that'll affect Main Street economies throughout West Virginia's first district. And you could see the growth could be the growth, and it could be supported in the energy transition. I'd be delighted to sit down with your staff, review the details, explore co-sponsorship of the bill. Is there anyone in the district whose support would be important to you that we might speak to?
Oh, I'd be delighted to have you meet with my staff. It seems like I got the easier task here. If you are going to speak with folks back home, then may I recommend you speak with Mayor Lean, being a former utility CEO. He's someone that I listen to regarding energy issues.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Like we said earlier, we're trying to make it easier for you to support our policy, so we'll make an appointment to see the mayor. I'm going to leave this one-page ask with you. And how would you like me to follow up with additional materials in the future?
Oh, you can follow up with Joanna through email.
Congressman, one last thing. Would you mind telling me with whom you enjoy working with across on the other side of the aisle?
Well, as you know, I'm new and there are a lot of ill feelings around here, but I do try to work across the aisle on many topics. Congressman Schrader and I have gotten to know each other on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we have been on Zoom together during the pandemic. He's not nearly as bad as he seems on TV, Amy.
Okay, so that's the end of our demonstration for an initial meeting. So let's switch gears and discuss one final consideration and take some time for questions. So after you leave the meeting, either schedule a follow-up debrief with your team on a separate meeting, online meeting, like a separate Zoom line or a new Zoom session. And for in-person meetings, just scoot down the hall like in this picture and do a debrief a little ways away from the office. And while volunteers have the meeting fresh in their minds, the note taker can read the notes aloud and make sure there wasn't anything that was missed. Then you can confirm follow-up, who's going to write and deliver the thank you card or the email. Sometimes we have one on hand and everybody signs it right there. Who'll file the meeting minutes online in the action tracker, who'll send the requested information to the member or staffer, who'll add a post about the visit to your social media feed, and who plans to generate a letter to the editor that mentions the member by name. Many volunteers will bring that thank you note with them. So again, that's a great idea to plan for ahead of time. And during the pandemic, some groups have started using Kudo board for thank yous. That's an online online situation. Tamara, back to you.
All right, so for many of you on the line, this might be your first meeting. Feel free, if you are up for revealing yourselves, if you might be considering going into your first meeting in DC, or if you have yet to have your first meeting, but you are eager to do so. And if that's the case, then you might feel somewhat nervous or even unqualified. And I mention this because it's really important to acknowledge, but also to be able to move through, because you have just as much right to be there as any one of the constituents in the district. And most importantly, your voice really matters. In order to help you alleviate these concerns, keep in mind another important meeting element is play, one of my favorites. So never underestimate the power of injecting a little bit of personality and fun into the staffer or congressional meeting. I'm not saying you need to bring top hats and get all dressed up. Well, we do want to dress up, but the point is, let's say you found out that the staffer grew up on a ranch. You can go ahead and ask if they know how to wrangle cattle. If your member of Congress went to a rival school, then you could bring that up in a jovial way. You might ask them about pictures or displays in the office, the things they're proud of. I was in an office once and they had a huge canoe on the wall, and I'm a canoeer. So canoeer, canoeist, whatever the word is. That was fun to talk about. And if this is your first meeting with the staffer, then ask them to introduce themselves at the beginning of the meeting. And these personal, playful moments will help build a stronger relationship and make the meetings more fun for everyone. You would essentially want these staffers and this congressperson to remember the meeting. That's the goal. So you want to make it positive and memorable. And one final return to the importance of practice. Here's the many advantages that it helps us with, is to build our reputation, to demonstrate respect, develop trust in the team and impress others, and then it also allows us to be present and adaptive. When we practice ahead of time, you never really know what scenarios will play out, of course, but that's being able to practice. Having practice allows us to be more focused on what is actually being said in the moment and responding to what we're hearing, as opposed to what we expect or think we heard. And that remaining flexible and practicing good listening is key. So
finally, what we want to do is just to review. Here's a quick list of the meeting flow to help make things easier to remember as you prepare your meeting. Introduce yourself as a constituent. Once they know you're a constituent, that's just extremely important. Ask them to say a bit more about themselves. Especially with staff, they can be pretty shy. Listening for values is really important, so we can find and acknowledge those areas where we agree with them. As you make your primary ask, use your own words to share how our policy addresses the members' concerns, like how the border adjustment encourages China to reduce emissions. Ask follow-up questions to draw out more information and find out what they do and don't understand about our policy. And as you address their concerns, practice asking permission to proceed. And that asking permission prepares them to hear what you have to say. They'll be more ready to absorb it. And then identify those next steps. What could we be doing more of in the district to make it easier for you? Thank them for their time, and then go do your debrief.
So at the end of each training, you'll see a green button that says log your training, or on the interactive trainings, it says log your training. I also have a link for you that you can automatically log your training, which I will drop in the chat in just a moment. And you can also log your training as future reference through the action tracker just by going to this chapter and volunteer development button at the action tracker page and typing the first few letters of the training, and it will show up there. So thank you so much. Our emails are here on the screen. If you have any questions, the fastest way to get your question asked is to go to the forums, community.citizensclimate.org/forums, or you can email me, myself, or Amy. So thank you so much for your commitment to the climate, for your interest and commitment to creating effective lobbying meetings. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your evening, everybody.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Citizens Climate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration.
Like what you hear? Recommend us to your friends and make sure to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us show up on other listeners' feeds. Feel free to pass on any suggestions for future episodes in the comments as well.
And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.